So, Andrew, what do you like about reading?
I like reading the first book in a series and trying to figure out which of the characters is going to be a bad guy. Because one of them always turns. What do you like about reading, Crystal?
I just like reading because it helps me figure out who I'm going to be for Halloween the following year.
Yeah, I hope you can get rid of that Bella costume.
It's no longer in style. It's
really not. Everybody, this is the Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast. The podcast where we take a look at a self-published work, what's too hot, what's too cold, and what's just right. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Crystal.
What did we read this week, Crystal?
This week we read The Written. It's book 1 in the Emaneska series by Ben Galley.
Tell me a little bit about this book.
This book is about a mage named Farden, and he is trying to prevent whoever has stolen this ancient relic from opening up a well and releasing an ancient, terrible, horrible creature.
What genre is this then?
It is dark fantasy.
As opposed to light rainbow sparkle fantasy.
Light sunshine fantasy.
With unicorns.
Yes.
What was too hot? What was there just too much of?
There were a lot of instances where in the writing, the author would use the word the mage.
So third person references.
Right. So, it's from the main character's point of view most of the book. And it would really jolt me because instead of saying, he turned and picked up the sword, it would be the mage turned and picked up the sword, which is a bit disjointed. You don't really want to describe things in that way. There were several instances where we'd have a cut in the text and then we'd get, the stranger skulks down the alleyway, pulling his cloak in towards him. And you're reading it and you're thinking, okay, I'm pretty sure this is our main character, but we don't actually get a name until, 2 pages in.
Sounds like it's a very visual style, kind of like in a movie where, you can conceal who it is from the viewer, but this is reading and it's a little bit of a different rules apply.
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's really exposition that's unneeded because we really want to get to the point of who are we talking about, because once the reader starts wondering and questioning, it's not a trick anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's not something that you use once and it's like, oh, cool, that was really neat. It then becomes I'm really, who are we talking about now?
Suddenly, Andrew changed topics.
What a segue. That was pretty good.
Suddenly, Andrew's good at segues. Wait a minute.
This is what I pay for, Andrew.
Suddenly, Andrew's paid.
Moving on.
Yes. Tell me about the word suddenly.
We also got a lot of instances where the author would write, suddenly from his left, a claw, swiped him across the face. Or, suddenly, the spider's nest exploded in Andrew's face. That was my own. That was my own.
That's not from the book?
No, that's not from the
book.
Good. Okay. So, you don't actually need the word suddenly.
Yeah.
If you remove it, it makes no difference to the text. It's more concise and bottom line, it's not needed. So when you overuse it, it really stands out.
As a writer, how do you get around that when you want to have something quick happen, but you don't want to use a crutch word like suddenly?
You basically just write what happens.
But short,
exactly. The Andrew turned. The spider's nest exploded in his face.
Yeah.
That is much more affected than Andrew turned. Suddenly, the spider's nest exploded in his face. I'm talking about spider's nest in your face a lot, but...
I really appreciate it. We might cut this out. So I can sleep tonight. So what was too cold? What was there just not enough of?
So let's talk about the female characters.
Okay. Topic near and dear to your heart.
A little bit. I don't know why. It's shocking.
I think it's because you write female characters.
It's probably the truth.
So what did you find was the flaw?
There were 3 female characters in this story. And I found that they were stereotypical representations of women.
Like, what do you mean?
Here's coming right now is a spoiler. So if you don't want to hear this part, skip forward for a little bit. But, we had one woman who betrays him. One woman who she's a maid. She doesn't know how to fight. So her reactions to violence or anything is a little bit, on the flightier side. And then the third is so aggressive that she comes off as completely, unlikable. And for the context of this podcast, we won't use a particular word, but I'm sure you all can guess what that is.
It sounds like they were just very flat characters.
Right. And I'm sort of giving this point the benefit of the doubt because I know that this is the first book in a series.
And he's very young when he wrote it.
Right. He's very young when he wrote it. So I am interested in reading more books in this series to find out where this goes because I can only assume that his writing gets better. The fact that these three females sort of fall into each stereotypes, I think, it's easy to try and fall into having stereotypes for different characters, men or women, because, you want to give them a different and unique personality. When in reality, you're not giving them the flavor of dialogue or humor.
How do you write characters that are of an opposite gender? Like, what are some of the tips? Like, when you write a good layered male character, how do you approach that? And is that applicable to a man writing a female character?
It's a good question. I think, just as an example, the male characters in the book were very, very well written. Mm-hmm. And, the author is a male. I think what you can do is take a look to friends of the opposite gender.
Or half sisters.
Or just, come on, parents, it's been 20 years, but I need you for science. So,
I will be a better writer, Mom.
So, if you don't have the benefit of having siblings from, of another gender, such as myself, take a look at your friends, take a look at the people that of the opposite gender, and decide, what do you like about them? What makes them likable to you? Ultimately, I don't want to say look at your friends and be like, what do I hate about you?
Because I think we talked about this in another book. Then sooner or later, someone's going to come to you and say, is this character me?
Exactly.
And if you're not a good liar.
Yeah, trouble. Ultimately, I do think men and women are the same. We have the same emotions. We have the same driving forces. It's just how you portray them as the character in your descriptions and your dialogue. There are some differences, and depending on how you want to make your character, you can go for that.
You felt differently about the book in the first half than you did in the second half.
I did. I loved the second half.
Well, that's good, because that's the half that really counts.
It is, actually.
It's the half that makes you read the next book.
Exactly.
What did you find challenging with the first half? The
first half I found hard to get through because I wasn't a super huge fan of our main character.
What was he doing?
He is, at the beginning, he's a very gruff character, super awesome with his powers. I think that was an element that was really neat and cool. How I'm not going to sort of spoil it here. That was a cool element, so he's super proficient in his powers. There's nothing he really needs to learn about them. But he has this anger management problem that gets him into trouble. And into trouble of the kind that makes me dislike him, in that he is violent with people who are not necessarily involved.
Aggressive trouble. The seeking problems trouble. The antagonist trouble.
Right. And it comes from a rage that it's been described several times that he can't really control it. There are also other elements that, again, I don't want to spoil in this podcast. But as we near the second half of the book, he is sent to deliver something to this group of people. They are dragons and sirens. And at that point, when he meets the dragons and the sirens, then I begin to like him. He suddenly loses the gruffness. And because he's working with a people where his people have been at war with them in the past, there's a bit of a tense relationship there, and he needs their help. He's very much trying not to lose his temper. But I found that the way that it was written was that he didn't really have to try that hard.
Yeah.
And
the character changed.
The character changed. The character completely changed, and it was for the better, because again, from that point on, then the action started to pick up. Then we started to see a little bit of the moving pieces come together, and I then got into it.
Speaking about all the different moving pieces, what did the author get just right?
I loved the world building in this book.
Yeah, and what a world.
It was incredible. And I say that from someone who has tried to world build, and then you realize that you don't have a good picture of it in your head, and you're basically doodling squiggles on a paper and, you know, trying to come up with something.
It's not easy. There's a lot of layers to this one.
Oh, yeah. And I think he did a fantastic job. He knew his world. He knew the people in the world. And he described it in a way that, you know, I usually don't like a lot of description, but in this book, because everything was described in a unique way, I felt myself really drawn into wanting to know more about the world that these characters lived in.
So that was The Written, book 1 in the Emaneska series by Ben Galley. Who do you recommend reads this book?
Seeing as this is a dark fantasy, I'd recommend an older audience. That being said, the swearing and the action, I wouldn't consider it to be something that was too gory or too inappropriate.
Where do we find this book?
I found this book on Amazon.
But rather uniquely, Ben has his own site.
He does. He has a site called Libero, and I hope I'm saying that right. Basically, it's similar to Amazon in that you can upload your self-published novels. And once you upload your self-published novels, you can then sell it in a variety of formats. And you also get sort of a bigger cut of the pie than some of the other distributors of ebooks. I think it's a fantastic idea. Anything that supports self-published writers is a benefit in my book. So check that out if you're interested. It's libero.com.
Libiro?
Yep.
And that's The Written by Ben Galley. Hey, if you wanted to reach out to us to request a review, it's info@everythingstemporary.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we do this for you so that you can get a better view on the books. Crystal, where can you find us?
Aside from our website, which is www.everythingstemporary.com, we're also on Twitter at everythingstemp, and we are on YouTube, Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast, and on iTunes. So if you like what you hear, please do subscribe. We'd love to hear from you.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Crystal. Until next time, keep reading.
Crystal, I have to ask you, the spiders in my face?
I got this so let me tell you. I saw this thing on YouTube video where this guy poked a spider's nest, and all these spiders came running down, and I just pictured them on your face.